I request our own Madam, Dr. Vishpala Madam, to share a few things about today's webinar. Dr. Vishpala Madam, please.
Thank you, Ketan, so much. I always like to say at least one or two words before we start, so that it makes me, feel that we have done a whole thing of NJH. So today is our ninth NJH webinar, which means that for 4 months and up, 4.5 months, we have been talking, and which is a big time. And so, what is the significance of the number 9? It is really amazing. It is Navratri, right? And if you look at the speakers today, we have, where are the Navratri celebrated maximally in the whole of India, in Gujarat and in South India, right? In Tamil Nadu. That is the two places. So you see what kind of planning NJH does to present to you. So we have one speaker from Gujarat, Bhaskar. We have Rama Hariharan from Tamil Nadu, and they are going to regale you really nicely, because both are personalities which are not limited, not got blinkers like we talked about, like Equinum last time with blinkers. No, they have vast knowledge of various fields, and they excel in various fields, and they are going to bring you a very, very beautiful way of learning homeopathy. Thank you, Ajit, so much for talking about how you are so involved with Engage and throwing this open to the public. Back to you, Ketan.
Thank you, Madam. Your word is always useful for us. Now we start our today's webinar. Before I inviting our first speaker, Dr. Rama Hariharan, I want to introduce one unique personality right now. And after that, I will invite our speaker, Dr. Rama Hariharan. This girl, born and brought up in cosmopolitan city of Mumbai. From childhood, he was fond of theatre, and she performed in Kannada theatre. Her another hobby was traveling, meet people, and explore new things. So she took assignment as an air hostess in Air India. After passing her graduate, she did work as an industrial marketing researcher.
Seminar.
After marriage, she shifted from Mumbai to Chennai. This is photograph of her family in Chennai, and all 4 members of her family have very badly suffered with skin issue. Constantly thinking how to get rid of this skin problem. And as always, homeopathy came in rescue, and it's cured permanently all family members from the skin problem. And this result was turning point in her life. She left that lucrative work, successful career, and started learning homeopathy at the age of 31 years. Learning with 2 kids and family responsibility was not an easy task. She has knowledge of 5 languages, got 5 diplomas in 7 years, and she proved that when there is a will, there is a way. Any idea about this personality?
Yes. Yes.
No one else but our own Dr. Rama Hariharan. And she is our first speaker of today's webinar. This is her guru, Dr. Ranga Krishnan, her husband, field director, and her daughter Anjali, who is also homeopath and teaching in UK colleges. Relation with NJH since 1992 and very creative EB members of NJH family. Dr. Rama Hariharan, practicing homeopath in Chennai since 30 years. Along with homeopathy, she emphasized on yoga, food habit, best flower remedies, reflexology, walking, meditation, time with family, your hobbies, everything. And I one more things about her. Even in follow-up also, she use repertory in each and every case. Usually we use repertory in new case only, for new case only, first time visit, but she has habit to use repertory in every case, in our follow-up also. So this all about our first speaker, Dr. Rama Hariharan. She will talk about anxiety. We have a rubrics about anxiety, but she will tell how she used this rubric, anxiety, and solve the cases. With respect, I welcome Dr. Rama Hariharan. Madam, floor is yours. Please start your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Share screen.
Thank you, Dr. Ketan. That was a very overwhelming introduction. Thank you, Dr. Vishpala, for this opportunity. Let's begin. So, what are we going to talk about today? This is anxiety, a very different viewpoint on anxiety. What is anxiety? According to the Oxford English Dictionary, it is a concern about imminent and future difficulties and worries dwelling on it. How is it very different from fear? Fear is an unpleasant emotion when we are exposed to either danger or an expectation of pain. When it is sudden, it's called panic. When it is abnormal or morbid, it's called phobia. But it's an important defense mechanism because it helps our immunity. Of course, only if it is appropriate. And we are moving on, and we said there were myriad symptoms of anxiety that everybody encounters, almost like opening a Pandora's box. And this is how they present themselves when they come on to the clinic. And we were talking about how palpitation in the chest, and we finished with the head, mouth, and throat areas, and then stomach. There'll be this vomiting and stomach ache, which is very common with school kids who don't want to go to school. And we have to figure out what that anxiety is all about. This is one of my favorite opening lines of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, which talks about how all happy families look alike, but unhappy families are unhappy in their own ways. I would like to add, all happy families look alike, but anxious people are anxious in their own ways. So most people do not listen with the intent to listen. They listen to actually with the intent to reply. But as homeopaths, we are so quickly wanting to prescribe. Listening, according to Hahnemann, is the most important aspect of homeopathy. We have to receive the patient. And I will be sharing some chronic cases where anxiety became the window to their case. And how did this happen? Through a breakthrough that I found in 4 different ways. The aphorism 84, which is, I think, all important when we are receiving the case. Because after all, listening intently and receiving the patient is primary for any homeopath. He is or she is the author, script writer, director, actor, producer, songwriter, musician, everything of their own story. And we are the audience. And we have a duty to listen to them very well. They have come across with everyday anxieties, just like you and me. But when we listened and listened intently, there was some specific anxieties. And I found a common thread among all these chronic cases. So let's go straight and go into case 1. This was a 59-year-old lady who was a known case of diabetes with small joint arthritis, left renal stone compression fracture of the left L1 vertebrae, osteopenia, and she was already on homeopathy. And she called me on 26th during the lockdown. In fact, that time we had a total lockdown here in Chennai, where we were not even going out of the house. And she called up at about 10 in the night saying she had 3 large eruptions on her left lower abdomen. There was pain, very excruciating, extending to left lumbar. Abdomen was bloated, ineffectual stools, had increased urination in the nights. And her physician neighbor had diagnosed it as herpes zoster. So I sent some medicines. There was no response, beginning with arsenicum album, Nux, Hepa, Rustox, Mesarium, ranunculosis bulbosus. Nothing helped. So I needed to step back and look at the big picture. What was really bothering her that did not allow any of these remedies to act? So I went into her childhood. She was a puny, sickly child who had to miss school often because she had this history of epileptic seizures and primary complex and repeated tonsillitis. So there was no play, no close friends. Felt left out quite often. And she cried. And her uncle and aunt who brought her up, because her parents were in non-family stations, remote facilities there. And they brought her up very well. And this was uncle's motto: be bold, never cry, never look back, help others and work hard. This became her motto for life. When she attained puberty, her health just blossomed. So from puberty to menopause, she was in perfect health. She got married, had 2 children. Her husband was very busy with corporate life, and she single-handedly brought them up. This mother-in-law was very rude and insulting. She was the youngest daughter-in-law of a very large landlord family in the small town in a village. And she was educated. She had finished her MA. She was working. And she was treated like an outsider, almost like a pariah. But she took the children. Every annual summer vacation, they spent it at the village. Then, around menopause, in a span of 2 years, her entire life support system vanished. Her uncle and aunt who brought her up so lovingly, her parents, her father-in-law, who was the only support in that family, all died. And that's how diabetes set in for her. Then, a few years later, her mother-in-law was diagnosed as cancer colon. So she moved in with them because they were in the city. There was a full-time nurse. This lady actually prepared all the special meals, and yet the mother-in-law's bickering continued on and on. So finally, the patient quit her job. She was a very top executive in a large multinational. She quit it all to continue to serve her mother-in-law. And in a few years, the mother-in-law died. So what were her responses? There was this fear, tremendous fear of losing the family, especially after her support system vanished. And there was an anxiety of health, not only of herself, her daughters who were married by now, their families, their in-laws, everybody should be very worried about and what she could do to help. Excuse me. And she wouldn't rest till she was able to help them all. And what was the physical response of all this anxiety? There was palpitation, heat, restlessness, and this constriction chest. All heart investigations were done. The cardio had given her a clean chit of health, but this constriction of chest continued. So this was her totality. Thanks. This was her totality. There was an ailments from anticipation anxiety. There was emotions suppressed. There was fear of health of loved ones, cares for the family, sensation of constriction, better being occupied, conscientious, and desire company. On the physical side was desiring eggs, which was very strange for a Tambram lady. Spice and milk. Sweat was high, was least exertion. She always liked to be active. She was an action lady. Better in the open air, short and stout. And there was a family history of diabetes on the paternal side and hypertension and cancer. Her mother had died of cancer of the liver. So this was the repertorization. Pulsatilla wasn't indicated here, though it had helped her earlier in some acute conditions. Arsenicum album didn't work. Why? Because arsenicum album's fear of losing people,
her near and dear ones is with a selfish motive. She feels if they die, then who will look after me? Whereas here, she was equally worried about herself and equally worried about the family around her. Nature more didn't come at all because this lady wanted company. She never wanted to be alone. Nux didn't help. Calcarea was so close, but Calcarea is anathema. Movement is anathema to Calcarea, whereas this lady wanted movement. There was no indifference, so sepia was not at all indicated. Carcinosin was the closest and seemed to fit her well, but even that didn't work. Though she was, there was no history of any control. In fact, her uncle and aunt actually pampered her. She never even missed her parents. So though she was forsaken, sensitive and conscientious and suppressed her emotions, the extreme anticipatory anxiety, carcinosin didn't fit. So what was her case? So I re-looked at the case, especially for the causation, because this was an acute exacerbation. So looked at what was the cause for the herpes. And after digging and digging and digging, she finally revealed that the recent financial loss of the husband in his ancestral property settlement, and that combined with the history of verbal abuse from in-laws, not just the mother-in-law, all the brothers-in-law and sisters-in-law would gang against her in the village, clinging to them, yet, and habitual suppression of own feelings. So this combination of refusal to acknowledge her feelings and deal with it healthily obviously led to the herpes attack. So this was an acute exacerbation of a chronic disease. It was structural, it was reversible, the pace was rapid. The dominant miasm was tuberculin, but there was a psychotic base to it. The fundamental miasm was psychotic syphilitic. The susceptibility was moderate to high because of so much of suppression of her feelings. Sensitivity again was the same, moderate to high. So the posology needed repetition very cautiously because of the high syphilitic in the fundamental miasm. So the intercurrent remedies that I planned were midorinum, hot patient, tuberculinum, and disco. And the chronic remedy was Magcar. Let's see what happens. So Magcar was prescribed on 5/9. Remember, this is lockdown, so there was no direct talking, and there was only meeting on the WhatsApp videos. On few days later, she was able to stand, cook. The back pain became better. She was walking at least 4 rounds in the building now with a short break. Urination was better. Skin eruptions were slightly getting better. The abdomen pain definitely was better. The stools had become normal and energy was better. So I continued. 10 days later, her back and the hand pain and the walking were all the same, but the skin eruptions, one of them was beginning to dry and the abdomen pain had completely vanished. So I stepped it up. I chose the LM potency because I needed to repeat and had to do it very cautiously because of the miasm. Then on the 30th, she called me at 10:30 in the night. 2 of her neighbors were hospitalized for COVID. This was a neighbor on the same floor and one below. She was so anxious. All the symptoms were the same. So I sent her, couriered her TUB the next morning. And that really helped. The back pain was there only when she was turning in bed. The hand pain was better. The skin eruptions were beginning to dry. She was walking 5 rounds now with 1 halt. So I asked her to continue with the LM, Magca. On the 12th, the back pain was no longer there. It was only stiff now. The skin was dry. Her hand pain had vanished. She was now walking 7 rounds with 1 brief halt. My energy levels are good. So asked to continue. On 15th, she joined the diabetes reversal diet and yoga program that she was wanting to do for a whole year, which means the Magca had touched her at a very deep level. So I stepped up the potency. And on 4/12, the skin was fine, the back, hand, leg, chest, everything had vanished. And she was able to fast. She was a foodie. She could never fast at all. That was a sign that Magca was touching her really, really deep. So I stepped it up and I'm waiting now when she finishes her program and decides to do her blood tests. Let's go on to the next case. Remember, these are all chronic cases and the anxiety remedy helped me go into the case. So this was a 37-year-old lady who came. She had a case of left ovarian cyst and a left hydrosalpinx. One recent cycle of spotting instead of the periods. She was obese, tall, stout, pleasant and very courteous and wanted to know if homeopathy could help her by strengthening her remaining ovary and avoid surgery because she already had an ovarectomy. So there was a family history of father's side was diabetes. There was chronic renal failure, hypertension. Maternal side there was diabetes, and her maternal siblings all had died either of cancer uterus, lung, or blood. Her own history had chickenpox, jaundice, typhoid. There was a sebaceous cyst on the top of her forehead that was excised when she was 8. There was early graying. She had started graying fully by the time she was 30. There was a history of dysmenorrhea, and after the wedding, there was extensive fertility treatment because she was not able to conceive. By 2011, 2 years after the first child, she had a right ovarectomy because there was a large multiloculated cyst and it was adherent to the pelvic wall and wrapped around the long round ligament. There were plenty of adhesions. She liked spice, sour, dairy, piping hot coffee, and didn't like beans, greens, cabbage. Sweat was very profuse on the head, except the head, and occasionally smelly. So what was she like? This young girl. She was a part of a large middle-class joint family where her parents were working. She was very obedient, very quiet, never reacted in arguments. She would cry all alone. She had fear of loneliness, dark, ghosts, and her favorite pastime was solving math problems and reading Tinkle magazine. So later on, she got married. She became a software programmer, arranged marriage, and every time she would have her periods, her father-in-law would say, "What? Again?" And that would make her very dreadful. When she discovered she was pregnant, unfortunately, her husband was abroad, had to go abroad on a long assignment, so she quit her job to look after her elderly in-laws. On her 8th month of pregnancy, there was a sudden death of her father of diabetic complications, and the devastated mother, the brother took her away to Kuala Lumpur where he was, and she could not return for her delivery because of some visa issues. So she wasn't there for her first delivery. She felt very forsaken. Then there were telephone calls that put her off into a total anxiety attacks. This was when the school principal called her. Her first child was an ADHD child, 4 years old, and he was put in a nearby regular school, 50, 60 kids in the class, and every day almost the school principal would call up and say, complain about some misbehavior of the child, which was normal in a 4-year-old ADHD, but she would be dreading it. And then would come calls every alternate day, asking about how she was and advising her about health. That again was dreadful. And worst of all were the gynecologists. What would happen? What would happen? How was her? What were her responses and what was her anticipatory anxieties? But let's look at the background of those anxieties. There was a fear of failure, extreme failure, especially when the father-in-law would say, "What? You have your periods again?" And she would feel so bad and embarrassed and blaming herself. And she would brood, not of the past, but of the future. When her father died, she decided to not cry at all. She wanted to be very bold for her mother and her brother. And when her mother didn't come, she really felt sad and forsaken. She would cry alone and try to be busy whenever she had these anticipatory anxieties. And then her what-if scenarios was many. Like, what if the child got thrown out of school? What if my in-laws fall ill? My husband is abroad. What if he fell ill abroad? And what if the gynaec ordered further treatment? What if she ordered a surgery? My God, I don't want to call my husband back on an emergency issue like this. And so on, would go on. So her anxiety when she quit her job was again very high. That's when it really started, because she could no longer hide behind her numbers as a software programmer. Let's look at her totality. There was fears of ghosts, darkness, failure. There was an anxiety, anticipatory. There was a forsaken feeling. She was very sad, but she was always better with company. She cried alone. There was anger, after anger especially, and sadness. She was very quiet during any conflicts, and she would brood of the future. Extremely sensitive, timid, and blamed herself for every little thing. Very conscientious, and being occupied always helped her. On the physical side, exercise helped. When her building opened the gym, she was the first to join and continued. She loved sour, spice, fruits, milk. She hated green colored vegetables. She liked her bath warm, but the room to be cool, not cold. She would sweat very profusely, occasionally with a strong odor. And this early graying, she was obese but stout. Tendency for adhesions and the ovarian cyst. And this was the uh, repertorization that came up. And as you can all see, Silesia was the top remedy. And Silesia was the obvious choice with anxiety of anticipatory of an event, fear of failure, darkness, brooding, crying alone, sensitive, conscientious of trifles, forsaken feeling, timidity, quiet during conflicts, blaming self, tendency for the adhesions, sweat, profuse, smelly, early graying, sebaceous cyst, infertility. It seemed to fit like a glove. Yet there was no response in all potencies. Why? Because in Silesia, they are aware and constantly acknowledge their lack of support of a guide, a mentor, and they will do anything and everything to preserve their image. That is the core of their personality. Here, she was all alone. It was a very different issue. Calcarea too didn't help because she, though it was indicated in symptoms, because movement again was important for her, whereas for Calcarea, no, it's not in the picture. Carcinosin, even though a lot of the anxieties and fears match, here from excessive control comes, in carcinosin comes the perfectionism. And to that extent, they're not worried about failure. Whereas for her, failure was very, very important. She was so worried about it. And secondly, carcinosin has a lot of artistic leanings. Very artistic they are. Here, she was very unidirection. She didn't have any hobbies at all. And being alone was all her main theme. So let's go into the analysis. This was a chronic case, structural changes. I'm not sure how it would be reversible, but the pace was slow, insidious. Fundamental miasm was psychotic, tubercular, and syphilitic. It's a tri-miasmatic case. Therefore, I wasn't sure about the reversibility. The dominant miasm was psychotic. The susceptibility was low to moderate because she withheld even crying when her father died and her mother couldn't come. And the sensitivity again was low to moderate. So the posology was low to moderate with frequent remedies, very cautiously. The intercurrent remedies that I planned was Thuja and Basilinum. The chronic remedy chosen was Magnesium. Definitely was significant. What happened? So I started with Thuja, 1-mstat, and started with Mag Silica 30. And the very next day, actually, after Thuja, she got her periods. So I asked her to continue after her periods continued. Start. Then on 15/6, the next month, the menses came on time, like college days. Remember, this is all during the lockdown days. More heavy than usual, no pain, and as it was a psychotic miasm, I continued to repeat the remedy. On 3/8, she called to say, emotionally I'm fine, no pains, menses are normal, I'm exercising regularly and very careful with my diet. But still, on the emotional level, there was still no response, so I continued the remedy. In 14/10, she called to say, menses were completely regular now, there were no pains at all. I still continued the remedy and asked her to have an ultrasound done. 30th of November, she called and said, when I asked her what about the ultrasound, she said she was so scared to step out as 2 of her neighbors and 3 close relatives were all hospitalized with COVID because of elderly in-laws and children at home. She promised she would do it definitely the next time. And she reassured me. She said, I'm fine emotionally, doctor. I'm handling all my situations well. And you will be happy that I'm even sharing my worries with my husband, some of them. So I asked her to continue also. I'm awaiting. Hopefully next month, she will have her ultrasound done. All these cases I will share with you in the National Journal in forthcoming issues. So let's look at the third case. This was a 56-year-old lady who had come on 6/3/15 for help for her ailing mother and also for her own anxiety and mild upper respiratory infections that she had and very low energy levels. She had volunteered for nights whenever her mother was in and out of hospital for a month now. This lady was average built and looks, was usually very bubbly and loquacious. But that day she was very edgy, anxious, and wanted to get out of that state very quickly. I had helped her in the past with some skin issues and recurring tonsillitis, sinusitis, and menopausal issues. Her physical generals, she found it very difficult to fast, loved spice, ice cream, chocolate, fish, fruits, warm food, not hot. Average, she never liked vegetables, loved and never liked cold drinks, but loved her alcohol. Her sweat was low despite activity. Sleep was good, and she had to cover her feet, irrespective of the weather. She liked medium weather, loved the beach and water. Marina Beach was her favorite. She had a menarche at 15. Despite 4 abortions, she had normal periods. Her bleeding was profuse only at menopause. That's when they discovered some seedling fibroids in the left adnexal cyst. She had a history of chickenpox, sensitive throat since childhood, tendency for mouth ulcers, some sinusitis, urticaria, both which were helped with homeopathy, and dyslipidemia and hypertension, which continued. Her father's side, there was hypertension. Maternal side, there was nothing significant. So what were her early years like? She came from a very small town in Tamil Nadu, in a very traditional conservative Tambram family, large joint family with 3-4 generations. Her father was a government clerk. She was a third of 5 siblings, an avid reader. And her favorite characters were Cinderella and the third child of King Lear. At 20, she fell in love with a firebrand orator of the Students' Union at college. And she was unable to convince her parents because he was a different caste and he was an atheist to boot. So they eloped to Madras, and she was ostracized by her family for very, very many years. Both of them did her PhDs. Both turned to teaching. She also started writing and nurturing students in theatre. Her theatre was activist theatre, socio-political issues basically. And then when the children left to pursue their higher studies, she experimented with the commune. A commune is actually where people of similar interests get together and try to live like a family. Duties are all shared, but there is no hierarchy. Of course, it was mainly her theatre people who came and lived with her, and after a while, it was disbanded. She became very famous in her feminist writing and theatre. So she was fine till here. There were very small problems that would come and go. But middle age and beyond was when all the problems started. Her husband and son became busy. Her daughter was busy as an activist. There were no close friends. She was all alone. She did have some romantic escapades, but she cut it short before it went too serious. Her mother was in and out of hospital once and came into Madras with her brother, and then eventually she died. At the same time, her daughter had a breakup, but insisted that she would deal with it independently. The husband had retired, but he had no time for her. And at college, her HOD was creating a lot of problems. So this is when her disturbances started. She was just getting close to her father, who had moved in with her brother at the other end of the city, when he too died. And then the realization of her husband hit her very badly. She realized that he was a typical traditional patriarch. He really came from the village, and that made her disappointed and angry. And then there was this big debacle with an outstation theatre group who hired her as a director. Within a few weeks, they could not see eye to eye with any of her views. She was not respected. She was so angry and hurt, and then she became very anxious about her reputation, and she never cut herself off. She just tried to avoid them. And last year around this time, her husband was hospitalized for his COPD. And for a whole week, she was all alone looking after, because by the time her son and daughter came, it was late. And then the daughter went off. She joined some protest group in some remote areas. Let's see what happened to her with all these events. She would come back to being busy. Whatever happened to her, she would want to be busy. And her idea of being busy was theatre and writing. So in the early times of being sad, forsaken, and she was guilty about her romantic escapades, and very sad when she lost both her parents. And the daughter didn't allow her to help her with her breakup. She was very angry and hurt and very sensitive to injustice when she figured out that her husband was having very traditional views, and the HOD was creating so many problems for her. The anxiety of her deadlines started Going up because by this time her writing became more and more difficult and the depression continued. Then when the theatre debacle happened, she became very disappointed. She was hurt. She was very anxious about her reputation and she tried to avoid them. She never cut off relations, but just avoided them. Then when her husband was hospitalized, the anxiety of health knew no proportions, both for herself and her husband. The what if scenarios were plenty. What if my husband wouldn't recover fully? What if he dies? What will I do? I am not close with my kids. How will they respond to me? Will I also be all alone? And so on and so forth. And how will I go back to college? What about that HOD? What was this totality of hers? The fears of cockroaches and hospitals. Desire company. This was after her parents died. Desire company and sympathy. She was vivacious, artistic, romantic, passionate, irritable, easily apologized, hurt, and especially when excluded, angry and sad, always better crying, lonely and forsaken, very anxious about health, and sensitive to injustice. There was a tendency for mouth ulcers. There was helped by movement and massage. Touch always helped her. She loved ice cream, spice, fish, alcohol, chocolate, fruits. She loved to live life king size. She hated vegetables. Sweat was low. And when her husband was hospitalized, she had continuous insomnia, especially after 3 o'clock. She just could not sleep. This continued for many months. History of uterine fibroid, adnexal cyst, dyslipidemia, and hypertension. So this was the repertorization. And FOSS was the obvious remedy. But FOSS didn't help. Why? Because FOSS is expressive, and here, despite being in the theatre, she kept all her emotions inside. All these emotions response that I put up in the previous slide is after digging again and again deep with her. Lyco seemed very indicated because of this hurt and anxiety, reputation, avoidance, especially when she was no longer being respected. You see, all her theatre were with students who listened to her implicitly. She was always the leader. And this outside group never listened to her. But then this was a one-off. It wasn't there. That was not her main issue. Netramoor and Sepia were not indicated. Netramoor, she wanted company. She was a people's person. And there was no indifference of Sepia in her. Arsenicum album used to help her in some of her acute sinuses. This time, it wasn't indicated. Pulsatilla and sulfur didn't help at all. So what was the analysis? As long as both she and her husband were busy, occasionally, in the early years, the tuberculinum, phosphorus, pulsatilla, rustox, ignatia, all helped bounce her back. But when the empty nest syndrome and menopause came on, then all the inner disturbances started. Then her coping mechanism of theatre and nurturing young girls to look within and work collectively. Remember, she's talking of minor activist theatre. Writing and physical activities were not enough. Inner feelings came to the forefront and remained, especially after parents died and the daughters break up, and when the husband had no time for her even after retirement because he was busy with his political groups. I too can fall ill was her realization. In theatre, despite working with emotions constantly, there were others. She was busy empowering others, no? But with a large cost paid, depression, uterine pathology, ovarian pathology, and the serious hypertension. Cinderella and Lear's third daughter remained her favorite character. So this was a chronic case, structural, wasn't sure of the reversibility. Fundamental miasm was sora, psychotic, and tuberculinum. The pace was rapid, repeated, erratic, sudden. The dominant miasm was, of course, tubercular, and the susceptibility was moderate because of all her suppression of her major emotions. Sensitivity was high. Posology was moderate and needed to be repeated. Intercurrent remedies I was planning was thuja, tuberculinum, and disco. The chronic remedy I thought was MacFos. I wasn't very sure. So I started her on the 13th when both her calf cramped and it was worse walking, better with heat and movement, cough off and on, sleep was not restful, there was throat, tonsil swollen, tongue was coated posterior, chest was clear, clinically normal, Husband was in hospital for CAPD, and her anxiety was so high that what she kept talking about was how will she manage the husband alone at home? Not so much as what the husband was suffering. Therefore, I gave her pulsatilla, though the generals didn't match. Of course, it didn't work. So on the 7th, when the cough persisted, and though clinically she was normal, she also came up with a concomitant of a right last finger, a trigger finger. And she was unable to work beyond 15 minutes because of it. And her deadlines to meet, she was missing swimming. She was a very active person. And because of husband was still at home and needed nursing, she just couldn't do any of her activities. So with all the generals of heat, better by heat and warmth, and movement, I started her with Rustox. And on 3/1, she came with that insomnia after 3 a.m. continued. She was disturbed. There was fear of health. There was fear of dependency, anxiety about it. And the husband still was requiring nursing. So the core of the case was not untouched. So I said, let's try a different approach. Let's go the kingdom way. So was it an animal kingdom? Though there was sexuality and movement was important, there were no territorial predator-prey issues here. What about the plant kingdom with her high sensitivity to the environment, but no single sensation running through? So it was a mineral. Support structure were becoming important. Her support and structure here was love, care, nourishment. Artistic, performance, anxiety, row 5, an inability to cope when that support structure was broken, and not voicing inner feelings became column 2, miasm tubercular, and the remedy was Magphos. So I was right in assuming it. And I gave her Magphos 200, just 3 doses. And see the magic that happened. On 15/4, she called me. What a dramatic change. She took the husband for counseling. We were rehearsing a new play with students. She restarted. She started walking regularly because she was locked down. She was awaiting her new book with a lot of enthusiasm. And she even employed her daughter in some protest with a translation of a song. Here shows the beginning of love. I'm awaiting to see how long this will hold. So I was looking at the background pattern of these patients. They were all married into traditional joint families, the case 1 and 2. And in the third, the husband turned out to be a very traditional male. The perception was of no support from parents, in-laws, and husband. They were very well-educated women. They were dutiful, hardworking, wanting acceptance, no acknowledgement of own emotions, and no dreams. And yet, Mag worked for all of them. So what were the patterns that I observed in these cases and many more of Mag? The routines were very important for them. That helped them because then they didn't have to think. Fears of unknown and losing loved ones. There was anticipatory anxiety. They were very dutiful and clung on to their support system despite verbal and physical abuse. And there was brooding of future. What if, what if, what if? That was abundant. Emotions were always hidden. What is the use? They loved company and they struggled all alone. What is the use? I'm all alone. Why share anything with anybody? Physically, they had high energy. Exercise was important. I had a triathlon, a MacCub triathlon star, I gave so many remedies, nothing worked. And when I was working on this, MacCub suddenly struck me. And what a dramatic difference MacCub made to her. Obese, but stout. Foodies. They love food. It was very, very difficult. And you see in that first case, when MacCub was given, she was able to fast. And she joined that program of diet. This is the magic that MacCub does, that Magnesium does. And they are always focused on their body. They don't want to talk about their inner feelings at all. So some inspirations when I was researching for this webinar, these were the books that really helped me. The first was the ICR Symposium Standardization Part 2, Area F on Magnesium, where magnesium in the cell is shown to retain the integrity of the mitochondria. So they are most important in energy generation and distribution. In element level, where they have a high melting point. At the human level, our energy with others with interpersonal relationship is love. And here there's an early lack of love, and the mind is resistant because of the high melting point to deep stresses of life. They have a strength of character, but with a humane disposition. They're able to convert a negative love expression into a positive one of giving love. Therefore, they differ completely from natrum. There is no bitterness in them. And then my favorite author, Edward Whitman, he talks of magnesium in plant as being the active principle of the green chlorophyll, which aids in synthesizing starch from water and carbon dioxide under light. So light, water, air are all condensed into matter, which is life and renewal. And in the mineral, it bursts like a lightning, like flashes happen. So that is destruction. So matter is destroyed, giving light and heat. This explosive, aggressive, spastic violence in a very seemingly quiet, composed disposition. I'll share with you a case of a magnesium case of a gym trainer who came to me recently about how his muscles would not recover despite the right diet, the right sleep, right food, everything. He had to put weights, 30, 40 kilos on barbells 6, 7 times in a day, and he would have sore muscles. And he says, generally they will recover, but off late they're not recovering at all. And then when I found out that he was rejected by his family and his wife, and he was due for divorce, Magcard helped him completely recover. And from Rajan Shankaran, the core perception, they feel that they don't get the care, protection and nourishment which is needed like an infant, dependent on mother for this. Has been abandoned by parents. Mere paas maa nahi hai. They're like an orphan. In an adult, this deep orphan feeling seems out of place. So they don't express it at all if they're aware of it. Most of the time, they're unaware. And these repressed emotions, which are usually causeless, lead to a lot of anxiety and fear that something will happen to the persons on whom they're dependent upon for this care and love. They feel they should not make any demands on anyone for anything. So they seem very, very independent, but they're very, very caring for others. They deny their anxiety. But there is a lot of causeless increased physical symptoms and pathology, which will obviously lead to this later on. And a lot of their dreams, which none of my patients had though, were of danger. But they're watching it, or of being left behind, especially in railway stations, etc. So what happens if you are able to...
Excuse me, madam.
Yes, sir. I'm wrapping up. What happens if you are able to look at some anxiety and you still don't know what is it is a prominent symptom in your patient and you don't know what to give? You can think of this bowel nosode called disco. I would like to leave you with this. They have an anticipatory anxiety of the future, fear of failure, darkness, strangers. There's a lot of worry. They can't relax, a lot of tension, can't desire to be alone, and shy, low confident, consolation bothers, and they're very tired. So when your patients become better after anxiety, this is how you would help them to make sure that their anxiety is always manageable. Thank you very much. Thanks, Dr. Ketan. Thank you, Dr. Vishpala. Thanks, the entire NJH EB team. Thank you, viewers, for being very patient and allowing me to come back after the debacle of my laptop. Thank you very, very much. I'd like to leave you with this. When you listen, it's amazing what you can learn. When you act on what you have learned, it's amazing what you can change. Thank you for this great opportunity, entire EB team. I'd like to quickly thank Team Swasthyam, all my teachers and colleagues at the National Academy of Homeopathy, Nagpur, MLD, MHI, Mumbai and Bangalore, the Sri Aurobindo Center for Homeopathy, Pondicherry, Swara, Konkan, and of course, my teacher, the late Dr. Rangakrishnan, who has been inspired me into this path of homeopathy, nourished me in my learning, and helped me on this journey with NJH also. So you must be wondering why I'm still with NJH. Well, NJH over 250 issues, that is my go-to place. It is part and parcel of my clinic. Whenever there's any problem with any patient, like how Dr. Ajit Kulkarni had told you in the beginning, pick up an appropriate NJH issue and there you have clinical diagnosis, pathophysiology, investigations, homeopathic approach, it's all there for you. So come, become part of this nourishing NJH family. Don't become a mag. Subscribe, write, share, and make this wonderful science of homeopathy grow. And along with NJH, which is actually the world's largest portal, I hope you're aware, both online and offline. Come become part of this nourishing family. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, madam. Really, it was a very good experience. You gave example of three cases and portrayed the whole magnesium group. It's really good learning opportunity here. And also, you will learn that how you create the totality from childhood and consider physical general, and also after repetition exclude one by one medicine and reach to the simillimum. Thank you very much, madam. And
Thank
now
you.
I must have talked to you about National Journal of Homeopathy. I think this is the only journal which has
Super.
been in continuum since its beginning. The way in which Vishwala and the team is going ahead unabated. There is no inhibition, just promotion. And there is not a single specimen of the copy which is not being published. This is so rewarding. That shows the persistence of the team and really dedicated to homeopathy. The first thing very important is you can have laying the hands on whatever subject you want. I have from Monday onwards seminar with Israeli people on milk remedies. I myself wrote an article of around 20 pages long back. I needed these two volumes of NJH to study. I could lay hands on the parts first and I didn't get the part second. I became so restless this morning. Finally, I received it today. So it is a confidence for me that yes, now I have to present before a group something which is substantial. Where could I get the information? That is the strength of NJH. They have several subjects almost from head to foot, almost from mind, several aspects of the faculties of the homeopathy and medicine. So you have the amalgamation of several concepts which are necessary to become a holistic homeopath in the life. So subject dedicated, homeopathy dedicated, author dedicated, and a very big data bank which NJ able to crystallize. And that particular way of presentation of NJH is not only useful for a author like me, for an international speaker like me, but also in day-to-day practice for a common homeopath. First, a homeopath is, before a patient, a common homeopath. What are his qualities is altogether a different aspect, and patients are, you see, in the requirement of you as a common human being. So we have this huge data bank which could use at any time. I was confronted with a case last month with an adolescent, and I wanted some information. I just told my students I want adolescence issue of the Engage, and I got it. And I got what is the information was needed in that particular case. This particular reference is something which is very important for a homeopath. And I think such a huge data bank being prepared over years is only available today with NJH. You can't imagine how much data has been generated, how much data can be used. And I think there is a big place to utilize this data. And I think now there should be a next step for the NJH where this data could be now, you see, united with the world data in future. So that this data becomes very useful data. And the name of the NJH now must go in every country possible. Although unfortunately in all those countries where I visit, there are no English speaking people. But anyway, it is possible that we can work at that particular level and make our data open with all the commercial negotiations and all other things in future. So why you should take the NJH? Because you are now open to access the information when you have the NJH. You have the subject-wide presentation of the data by several homeopaths. Third, your reference value as far as the homeopathic practice is concerned is enhanced multiple times. The fourth, your way of thinking, because there are thesis, there is a philosophy, there is a holistic thinking, there is a follow-up. So all that is needed for a homeopath to sit comfortable in the consulting chamber is provided by the journal, National Journal of Homeopathy. So I have an appeal for all those students, because the student is one who is going to become a teacher, who is going to become a PG scholar, who is going to become a doctor. And for healing in homeopathy, you require something additional qualities than just being a pharmacist to give the remedies. So at this particular level, you will always find that NJH will be a guide lamp for you to give you the vast information before you. And I think this is what is needed for the science of homeopathy. So this is a, you see, from the bottom of my heart, request to everyone, just be the life member, not only for 1 year or 2 years. With the life member, you will find you will have access to so much information even of the past. For example, you want my carcinosinum from the irritable bowel syndrome case, you can have it. If you want some information where Lopa Mehta and Manu Kothari are writing on hypertension, you can have this information in a funny way. You can have, you see, information about many books which are being published in the world with very good commentaries by the book review. So this data is making you a homeopath. A homeopath is made by one piece of information and digestion of it. So NJH will provide you that all pieces of the information, and then the fabric which is created out of all these will help you to become more cohesive, to become more holistic in the management of our patients. So I thank you everyone. Again, I appeal you and I declare that we should now begin with the webinar.
Thank you, Dr. Ranjit Kulkarni, for your suggestion and concern about our own National Journal of Homeopathy.